A local business program was featuring Pinnacle's remarkable turnaround as their lead story. From invisible delivery man to celebrated CEO in 6 months, it was the kind of story that made headlines. As Andrew prepared to go back inside, a delivery truck pulled up to the building. The driver, a young woman with determined eyes, struggled with a large cart of packages. Without hesitation, Andrew held the door open for her. "That looks heavy," he said, helping her navigate the cart through the doorway. "I'll show you where these need to go." She looked surprised. "Thanks. Most people just walk past." "I know exactly how that feels," Andrew replied with a warm smile. "I used to deliver to this building myself." "Really?" She looked skeptical. "But you're the CEO?" Andrew finished her thought. "That's new. For 3 years, I was right where you are now. Let me introduce you to everyone as we drop these off." As they moved through the office, Andrew made a point of stopping at each department, introducing the delivery person by name to everyone they met. He noticed how people's behavior shifted when he did this, their body language becoming more respectful, their attention more genuine. One young executive who'd recently joined the company looked confused by this practice. After the delivery person left, he approached Andrew. "Is there a reason you make such a big deal about delivery people?" he asked. "It seems like an unusual focus for a CEO." Andrew considered the question thoughtfully. "It's not just about delivery people. It's about recognizing that every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, regardless of their role. The moment we start deciding who's worthy of our attention based on their job title is the moment we start missing opportunities." He glanced around at the thriving company they'd built from the ruins of a toxic culture. Besides, you never know, the person delivering your packages today might be running the company tomorrow. The young executive looked thoughtful. "I never thought of it that way." "Most people don't," Andrew said simply. "And that's exactly why it works." As the day ended and employees headed home, Andrew took one final walk through the quiet office. On his desk sat a small package, his old scanner from his delivery days, mounted on a wooden base with a plaque that read, "Never underestimate anyone." They might be taking notes. He smiled, picking it up and placing it prominently on his shelf. It would serve as a daily reminder of where he'd come from and the unexpected journey that had brought him here, from the man they mocked to the leader who transformed them all. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of changes. The Pinnacle Technologies building looked the same from the outside, but inside, it was a completely different company. Andrew stood by the window of what used to be the CEO's office, watching the morning traffic below. The space was now a communal meeting area where teams could collaborate. He'd refused to take the executive office for himself, preferring a modest workspace among the other employees. "Quarterly numbers are in," said a voice behind him. Andrew turned to see the CFO, a former mid-level finance manager who'd been promoted for her talent with numbers and straight-talking honesty. "How did we look?" Andrew asked. She smiled, handing him a tablet. "Up 17% from last quarter. The new product line is exceeding projections, and customer retention has improved dramatically." Andrew scrolled through the report, nodding with satisfaction. "Any word from our friends at Westridge Tech?" Westridge was their biggest competitor, now struggling to keep up with Pinnacle's resurgence. "Their CEO reached out yesterday," she replied with a slight grin. "They want to discuss a strategic partnership." Andrew chuckled. 6 months ago, they wouldn't return our calls. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first few weeks had been chaos as they untangled years of poor management decisions and rebuilt trust with employees who'd grown cynical under the previous leadership. Some of the most valuable changes had come from the most unexpected places. Ms. Liu, now Facilities and Workplace Experience Director, had implemented a complete redesign of the office space. Gone were the status symbols that separated executives from everyone else. Instead, the layout encouraged collaboration and communication across departments. The 8 technician who'd once fixed Andrew's scanner was now Chief Technology Officer, leading a complete overhaul of their outdated systems. The quiet programmer whose ideas had been repeatedly dismissed was heading their most innovative product team, which had just secured a major contract with a Fortune 500 client. Andrew walked through the open office space, stopping to chat with employees along the way. Unlike the previous executives who'd hidden behind closed doors, he made himself accessible, regularly working alongside different teams to understand their challenges. "How's the new customer service system working out?" he asked a team leader who'd been with the company for years. "Complaints are down 60%, she replied proudly. "Turns out when you actually listen to customers and give us the tools to help them, everyone wins." Andrew smiled, remembering how that same employee had once vented her frustrations to him while he delivered packages. She'd had solutions all along, solutions the previous management had ignored. At noon, the entire company gathered in the largest conference room, now transformed into a multi-purpose space. Today was a special milestone. The official transition from crisis management to long-term growth, with Andrew being named permanent CEO by the board. As he stood before the employees, Andrew felt a wave of emotion. So many faces looking back at him with respect and optimism, many of the same faces that had once looked past him as if he were invisible. "6 months ago, I stood in this room and promised changes," he began. "Today, I want to thank each of you for making those changes happen. This turnaround isn't my success story, it's ours." He clicked through slides showing their progress: improved financial performance, reduced employee turnover, successful product launches, and most importantly, a workplace culture survey showing dramatic improvements in job satisfaction. "When I was delivering your packages, I saw both problems and potential," Andrew continued. "I saw talented people constrained by poor leadership. I saw great ideas dismissed because of who suggested them, not their merit. But I also saw dedication, creativity, and resilience, even when those qualities weren't recognized or rewarded." He paused, looking around the room. "The most valuable lesson from this journey isn't about business strategy or financial management, though those matter. It's about truly seeing people, recognizing that insight and ability can come from anywhere, and that titles don't determine someone's worth or potential contribution." Andrew clicked to a new slide showing Pinnacle's updated company values: respect, innovation, inclusion, and accountability. "These aren't just words on a wall," he emphasized. "They're standards we hold ourselves to every day. They're the foundation of our success so far and our roadmap for the future." After the presentation, as people mingled over lunch, Andrew stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "So proud of you. The kids can't wait to see Dad on the news tonight." He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. "But the most important thing I learned is that titles don't define capability. Some of the smartest, most dedicated people in this company are the ones who've been least recognized. That change is starting now." After the meeting, Andrew spent hours walking through every department, talking with employees, listening to their concerns and ideas. The maintenance supervisor showed him water damage that had been reported repeatedly but never addressed. The junior designers shared innovative product concepts that had been dismissed by previous management. The customer service team explained how simple changes could dramatically improve response times. Late that evening, as most employees headed home, Andrew found himself back in the break room, making a cup of coffee to power through more paperwork. Ms. Liu, the cleaning lady who had given him valuable insights during his investigation, came in with her cart. Well, she said with a warm smile. "Look at you now, from delivering packages to running the place." Andrew smiled back. "Not quite running it yet, just trying to fix what's broken." "They never saw you coming," Ms. Liu chuckled. "Too busy looking down their noses to see what was right in front of them." "You know," Andrew said thoughtfully, "during my first week as a delivery person here, you were the only one who bothered to learn my name. You always treated me with respect." "That's because I know what it's like to be invisible," she replied. "Been cleaning these offices for 15 years. Some of those executives never once said thank you." Andrew set down his coffee cup. "We're going to need someone to manage facilities and workplace environment in our new structure. It should be someone who knows this building inside and out, who understands what makes a workplace function well. Would you be interested in talking about that position?" Ms. Liu's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? In management? Who better?" Andrew asked simply. "You've been seeing the problems and solutions all along. Now you'll have the authority to fix them." As he headed back to his temporary office, the same one where the former CEO had once dismissed him as just the delivery guy, and felt the weight of the challenge ahead. Changing the leadership was just the first step. Changing the culture would be harder, but looking at the eager faces of employees finally being heard, he knew it was possible. The walls of the executive suite were lined with framed motivational quotes about leadership and success. Andrew stopped in front of one that read, "Position yourself for greatness." With a slight smile, he took it down and replaced it with a simple handwritten note, "Everyone deserves to be seen." Word spread through Pinnacle Technologies like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone from the receptionist to the programmers had heard that several executives had been escorted from the building. The rumor mill churned with questions. What happened? Who was in charge now? Would there be more layoffs? Andrew spent the morning in back-to-back meetings with Lee and the board members, hammering out details of the transition plan. Around 1 o'clock, he stepped into the employee break room to grab a quick coffee. Conversations hushed as people noticed him. Aren't you the delivery guy?" asked a young woman from the marketing department, confusion clear on her face. "Why are you wearing a suit?" Andrew smiled. "Yes, I was your delivery person. Now I'll be serving as interim chief operations officer while we restructure the company." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the room erupted with questions, everyone talking at once. Andrew held up his hands. "I know you all have questions. There will be a company-wide meeting at 3 o'clock to explain everything." He looked around at their worried faces. "One thing I can tell you now. This change is about fixing problems, not eliminating jobs. The only people who've lost their positions today are executives who were leading this company in the wrong direction." As he turned to leave, the 8 technician who had once fixed his scanner called out, "Is it true you were undercover this whole time?" Andrew paused in the doorway. "Not undercover exactly, just overlooked. It's amazing what you can see when people don't think you're worth paying attention to." The company-wide meeting that afternoon packed the largest conference room to capacity, with employees standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. Andrew stood at the front alongside Lee and the 2 executives who had been kept on, the CTO and the head of product development, both of whom had shown potential despite the toxic culture. "Many of you know me as the person who delivered your packages," Andrew began, his voice steady and clear. "What you didn't know is that for the past month, I've also been conducting an assessment of this company for Wellington Capital." He explained how his unique position had allowed him to observe the company's strengths and weaknesses, and how the board had decided to implement major changes based on his findings. As he spoke, he could see the range of reactions: shock, disbelief, and on many faces, a growing hope. "I've seen how hard most of you work," Andrew continued. "I've heard your frustrations when good ideas were ignored. I've watched talented people leave because they weren't valued. Starting today, things will be different." He outlined the immediate changes: a flatter organizational structure, transparent communication about company finances, and a system for employees to submit ideas directly to the leadership team. Most importantly, he announced a complete review of salaries to eliminate pay gaps based on gender or race. The customer service team will be getting those new chairs they requested 6 months ago, he added, which drew cheers from one corner of the room. And yes, the IT department will finally get the budget they need for those security updates. The mood in the room shifted from confusion to cautious optimism. When Andrew opened the floor for questions, dozens of hands shot up. "What happens to our projects that were already in progress?" asked a project manager. "We'll review everything over the next week," Andrew replied. "Projects with clear value will continue. Others might be modified or reassigned." A programmer raised his hand. "The old executives always said we couldn't update our software because it would cost too much. Has that changed?" "Absolutely," Andrew nodded. "We've already reallocated funds from the executive retreat budget to technology improvements. This company sells tech products. Our own systems should reflect that." The questions continued for nearly an hour. Andrew answered each one honestly, even when he didn't have all the answers yet. Several times, he turned to the remaining executives for their input, showing that this would be a collaborative leadership approach. As the meeting wound down, a quiet woman from accounting raised her hand. "I just want to know, how did you do it? Work here all that time, being treated like you were invisible, planning this whole thing." Andrew thought for a moment. When people underestimate you, they give you a kind of power. They speak freely, they show their true colors, they let their guard down. I didn't plan this from the beginning. It evolved as I saw what was happening here. He clicked to a slide titled Recommendations. First, a restructuring of the executive team with performance-based contracts for all leadership positions. Second, implementation of a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy with regular audits. Third, allocation of resources based on strategic priorities rather than executive preferences. The CEO, who had been growing increasingly red-faced throughout the presentation, finally exploded. "This is ridiculous. You're just a delivery guy. Who do you think you are to come in here and tell us how to run our company?" Andor met his gaze calmly. "I'm the person who's been walking through your doors every day for 3 years, invisible to you and your leadership team. I'm the person who took the time to understand your business while you were too busy looking down on me to notice what was happening right in front of you." Lee stepped forward. "The board has reviewed Andra's findings and recommendations. We fully support them." She passed out folders to each executive. These documents outlined a restructuring plan, effective immediately. The CEO flipped through his folder, his hands shaking with anger. "You can't do this. I built this company." "And now you're destroying it," Lee replied simply. "The board vote was unanimous. You'll receive a generous severance package, but your position has been terminated, effective today." One by one, she addressed the other executives, some being asked to leave, others being reassigned to new positions with clear performance expectations. As the meeting broke up in a buzz of shocked conversations, the head of sales, the one who had smirked about the delivery boy's big moment, approached Andra. "You set us up," he said, his voice tight with anger. "You spied on us." Andor shook his head. "I simply paid attention while doing my job, something you might have tried. Everything I observed was in plain sight. You just never thought the person bringing your packages might actually be watching, listening, and thinking." The man stalked away without another word. As the room emptied, Lee approached Andor with an extended hand. "Congratulations," she said. "The hard part starts now. Are you ready to help rebuild this company?" Andor looked around the conference room, thinking of all the talented employees whose voices had been silenced, the missed opportunities, the wasteful spending. He thought of his own journey from ignored delivery person to the man who would help shape Pinnacle's future. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm ready." Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Pinnacle's main conference room as executives filed in, their faces tense. The CEO arrived last, coffee in hand, forcing a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. None of them noticed Andor sitting quietly at the far end of the room, dressed not in his usual delivery uniform, but in a perfectly tailored navy suit. "Gentlemen, ladies," Lee from Wellington Capital greeted them from the head of the table. "Thank you for making time for this urgent meeting." The CEO cleared his throat. "Of course, though I'm still unclear about the exact nature of your concerns. Our quarterly report—" "This isn't about your quarterly report," Lee interrupted smoothly. "It's about the future of this company and your leadership of it." A heavy silence fell over the room. The executives exchanged nervous glances. "For the past month," Lee continued, "we've conducted a thorough investigation into Pinnacle's operations, culture, and financial management. Today, we'll be reviewing those findings." She gestured toward Andra. "Our lead consultant will present the assessment." All eyes turned to Andra. For a moment, no one reacted. Then recognition slowly dawned on their faces. "Wait," the COO said, leaned forward with narrowed eyes. "Aren't you the delivery guy?" Andra stood and walked to the front of the room with quiet confidence. "Good morning. Yes, until yesterday I was your delivery person. My name is Andra. Though I doubt any of you bothered to learn that during the 3 years I've been coming here." The CEO's face flushed red. "What is this? Some kind of joke? Lee, you can't seriously." "I can and I do," Lee cut in firmly. "Andra holds an MBA with a specialization in corporate restructuring. He's been working with us as a consultant while completing his degree. His unique position gave him insights that an outside consultant could never access." Andra connected his laptop to the projector. "I spent the last month documenting Pinnacle's strengths and weaknesses. Today, I'll share what I found and my recommendations for moving forward." The room remained stunned as Andra pulled out his first slide. Some executives looked angry, others embarrassed, and a few seemed simply confused. The head of sales leaned back in his chair with arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "This should be entertaining," he muttered to his neighbor. "The delivery boy's big moment." Andor heard the comment but didn't react. Instead, he began his presentation with hard facts. Pinnacle has lost 18% of its market share in the past year. Employee turnover is at 42%, nearly double the industry average. Customer complaints have increased by 57%. With each damning statistic, the smirks faded. Andor moved methodically through his findings, showing how leadership decisions had directly contributed to the company's decline. The executive team approved a $2 million renovation of this floor, he noted, displaying before and after photos, while denying a $50,000 request to update critical cybersecurity systems. That decision led to last month's data breach, which has already cost the company over $300,000 in damages. The CTO shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Andor had included his email denying the security update request, with his actual words highlighted. "The delivery guy manages to get in and out without access codes. How hard can security be?" Andor continued, his voice steady. "Pinnacle has lost 7 key talents in the past year, all women or people of color. Exit interviews indicate the same pattern of their ideas being dismissed or credited to others." He clicked to a slide showing a series of emails between executives discussing a product idea. This innovative feature was first proposed by a black female programmer. Her manager called it unrealistic. 3 months later, a white male employee suggested the same idea and was given a team to develop it. The HR director looked down at his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. For nearly an hour, Andor laid out his findings. He presented financial mismanagement, toxic leadership practices, and missed opportunities without emotion or accusation. The facts spoke for themselves. When he reached his final slide, the room was utterly silent. Despite these issues, Pinnacle still has potential, Andor said. The company has talented people, loyal customers, and products that could be industry-leading with the right improvements, but realizing that potential will require significant changes. The next few days flew by in a blur of activity as Andor dove deeper into his investigation. With Wellington Capital's authority behind him, he now had access to company files that painted an even grimmer picture than he had imagined. Late one evening, when most employees had gone home, Andor sat in a small conference room reviewing financial reports. The cleaning lady, an older woman named Ms. Liu, paused in the doorway with her cart. "Working late again?" she asked, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Just trying to understand these numbers," Andor replied, rubbing his tired eyes. Ms. Liu glanced over her shoulder before stepping into the room. "You know, I've been cleaning these offices for 15 years. Seen 5 CEOs come and go. This bunch is the worst of them all." Andor looked up with interest. "How so?" "They waste money like it's water," she said, lowering her voice. "Last month, they remodeled the executive bathroom. Marble counters, fancy showers, the works. Cost a fortune. Same week, they told the customer service team they couldn't replace their broken chairs because of budget cuts." Andor jotted this down in his notebook. "You notice a lot, Ms. Liu." "When you clean up after people, you learn who they really are," she replied with a knowing nod. "The big boss throws tantrums when things don't go his way. Throws things, breaks them. Guess who has to clean it up? And that man never once has thanked me or even looked me in the eye." These conversations became Andor's most valuable source of information. The security guards, the maintenance staff, the cafeteria workers, they all had stories that revealed the true character of Pinnacle's leadership. The A technician told Andor how executives ignored repeated warnings about cybersecurity risks. "They don't want to spend the money until there's a breach," he explained as he fixed Andor's scanner one afternoon. "Meanwhile, we're sitting ducks for hackers." A young accountant, working late one evening, confided that she discovered some questionable expense reports from the executive team. Spa weekends and golf trips classified as client meetings, but there were no clients present, she whispered. "When I brought it up to my manager, he told me to mind my own business." Each story confirmed what Andor had suspected. Pinnacle's problems stemmed from leadership that prioritized their own comfort over the company's success. The most troubling pattern emerged when Andrew began reviewing personnel files. With help from a sympathetic HR assistant, he discovered that several talented employees had left the company in the past year. The official reasons varied: better opportunities, family relocation, career changes. But exit interviews told a different story. "Look at these comments," the HR assistant said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "Notice anything about the employees who mentioned hostile work environment or lack of advancement opportunities?" Andrew scanned the list and felt a chill. Almost all were women, people of color, or both. The pattern was unmistakable. "Has anyone addressed this?" he asked. The assistant shook her head. "I tried bringing it up once. Got told to focus on cultural fit in our hiring instead." Andrew included these findings in his report to Wellington Capital, along with specific examples of how this discrimination had hurt the company's performance. One particularly painful case involved a talented software developer whose ideas for a new product line were repeatedly dismissed. After leaving Pinnacle, she launched her own startup based on those same ideas. Her company was now one of Pinnacle's fastest-growing competitors. As the investigation neared its end, Andrew became more careful about his dual role. He continued his deliveries, but kept his interactions brief, afraid that his growing knowledge might somehow show on his face. The executives still barely acknowledged him, which now seemed like a blessing. At home that weekend, his wife watched him spread his notes across their kitchen table after the kids went to bed. "I can't believe they're paying you to do what you've already been doing," she said, bringing him a cup of tea. "The difference is now I can actually help fix things," Andrew replied, organizing his findings into categories. "These people are struggling under bad leadership. Good ideas get ignored. Hard work goes unrecognized." She squeezed his shoulder. "Just be careful. If those executives find out what you're doing before you're ready." Andrew nodded. "I know. I could lose my delivery job and the consulting gig. And they'd make sure you never got another opportunity like this," she added. "People with power don't like being exposed." On Monday morning, Andrew arrived at Pinnacle to find the executive floor in chaos. The CEO was shouting at his assistant while several managers hovered nearby with worried expressions. "What do you mean Wellington wants an emergency meeting?" the CEO demanded. "About what?" Andrew quietly delivered his packages, all ears as the assistant explained that Wellington Capital had concerns about the company's direction and wanted to discuss preliminary findings from their review. The CEO cursed. Those survey results weren't supposed to go directly to them. Who authorized that? As Andrew slipped back into the elevator, he smiled to himself. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. The assessment was done, and Wellington had scheduled the confrontation. Now came the hard part, preparing to step out of the shadows and into the spotlight. What the Pinnacle executives didn't know was that in 3 days, they'd be face to face with the delivery man they'd ignored and mocked for years, and he'd be holding their professional futures in his hands. The downtown coffee shop buzzed with morning energy as Andrew sat across from Lee, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who carried herself with quiet confidence. As Wellington Capital's head of investments, she didn't waste time with small talk. "So tell me," she said, stirring her black coffee, "how does a delivery driver gain such specific knowledge about Pinnacle's internal operations?" Andrew smiled. "When you're in a service job, you become like wallpaper to a lot of people, especially to those who think they're important. They talk around you, not to you." He pulled out his notebook and slid it across the table. Lee raised an eyebrow as she flipped through pages of detailed observations, organized by department and issue type. "For 3 years, I've made deliveries to every floor of that building. I've seen which teams work well together and which don't. I've heard conversations I wasn't meant to hear. And I've talked to employees who never get asked for their opinion by management." Lee nodded slowly, impressed. "And meanwhile, you've been working on your MBA. Night classes," Andrew confirmed. "My final project is on corporate restructuring. My professor thinks my observations about Pinnacle would make an excellent case study." "I think it could be much more than that," Lee said, closing the notebook. "Wellington has invested over $30 million in Pinnacle. For the past year, their numbers have been slipping. The executive team keeps promising a turnaround, but we're not seeing it." She leaned forward. "We need someone who knows what's really happening inside those walls. Someone who can give us an unfiltered assessment and recommend changes. Andrew's heart raced. This was the opportunity of a lifetime, but there was a problem. They'd never talk openly to me if they knew I was reporting back to you, he said. The moment I walk in as a consultant, everything changes. Lee's smile was knowing. What if nothing changed at all? What if you continued your deliveries while conducting your assessment? We pay you as a consultant, but your role would remain confidential. Andrew considered the idea. It felt slightly dishonest, yet he wouldn't be spying, just observing more purposefully what was already in plain sight. I need some official cover for asking questions, he said finally. We'll arrange for an employee satisfaction survey to be distributed. As the delivery person, you can follow up on participation. It gives you a reason to talk to people. 2 days later, Andrew walked into Pinnacle with his usual delivery cart and a new sense of purpose. His first stop was the HR department, where he had a package for the director. Just need a signature, Andrew said, handing over his scanner. The HR director, a thin man with perpetually worried eyes, scribbled his name without looking up. Thanks. Instead of leaving immediately, Andrew hesitated. By the way, I'm supposed to remind everyone about that employee survey. Something about Wellington Capital wanting feedback. The director looked up now, annoyed. That survey is causing me headaches. Nobody wants to do it because they're afraid the executives will find out who said what. That bad, huh? Andrew asked casually. You have no idea. Between you and me, morale here is in the toilet. The CEO hired his college buddy as COO last year, and the guy's a nightmare. Fired some of our best people for questioning his decisions. Andrew made a mental note as he pushed his cart toward the next department. Throughout the day, he dropped similar casual questions about the survey, gathering candid responses that people would never put in writing. In the tech department, a programmer rolled her eyes when Andrew mentioned the survey. What's the point? Last time we gave feedback, nothing changed except the snack options in the break room. I hear you, Andrew replied. Must be frustrating to not be listened to. You know what's really frustrating? She lowered her voice. We're using outdated technology because the executives want to approve updates. Our competitors are running circles around us while we patch together systems that should have been replaced years ago. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle. By the end of the week, Andrew had spoken to people in every department, asking simple questions that opened floodgates of information. As Andrew finished his deliveries and headed to his evening class, his phone rang with an unknown number. He answered it while sitting in traffic. Hello, is this Andrew? A professional-sounding woman asked. Yes, it is. My name is Lee from Wellington Capital. Your professor, Dr. Wilson, suggested we speak with you about a potential consulting opportunity. Andrew's heart skipped a beat. Was this the chance he'd been waiting for? I'd be interested in hearing more, he said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady despite his excitement. Excellent. We're looking for someone to conduct an independent analysis of one of our investments, Pinnacle Technologies. Dr. Wilson thinks you might have some unique insights. Andrew smiled to himself as traffic began moving again. They had no idea just how unique his insights really were. People say that when you're ignored long enough, you become invisible. For Andrew, this invisibility had become a strange kind of superpower. Package for accounting, he announced as he entered the finance department on Tuesday morning. The employees barely looked up from their computers. One man waved vaguely toward an empty desk without making eye contact. Andrew placed the package down and updated his scanner, all while overhearing a hushed conversation between two managers. The quarter's numbers are worse than we thought, the woman in a navy blazer whispered. The boss is hiding it from the board. Andrew's ears perked up, but his face remained neutral. 3 years of deliveries had taught him to listen without appearing to listen. People spoke freely around him, as if he weren't even there, just another part of the office furniture. In the hallway, he passed the company's top salesperson complaining loudly on his phone. These new product features are garbage. I can't sell this to clients when our competitors offer twice the functionality for the same price. Andrew mentally filed away this information as he continued his rounds. In the break room, he found a young programmer staring miserably into her coffee cup. Rough day? Andrew asked as he set down a package on the counter. She looked up, surprised that someone had noticed her. They shut down my idea again without even considering it. Said it would take too much time to implement. But it would have fixed the bugs customers keep complaining about. That's tough, Andrew replied sympathetically. Sometimes the best ideas come from the people who actually do the work. She smiled slightly, appreciating his comment. You're the delivery guy, right? You're here all the time. Name's Andra, he said with a warm smile. Thanks for listening, Andra. Nobody else around here does. These small interactions happened daily. While executives passed him in hallways without a glance, the rank-and-file employees gradually came to see Andra as a friendly face. They didn't know he was carefully piecing together a complete picture of the company's inner workings. That evening in his business ethics class, the professor discussed corporate culture. A company's true values aren't what's written on the wall. They're reflected in how people treat each other, especially those they think can't benefit them. Andra stayed after class, approaching the professor's desk with his notebook in hand. Professor, you mentioned we should find a real company to analyze for our final project, Andra said. I think I found the perfect case study. The professor looked intrigued as Andra shared some of his observations about Pinnacle Technologies, the wasteful spending on executive retreats while cutting staff benefits, the brilliant ideas from lower-level employees that went ignored, the culture of fear that prevented honest feedback. This is fascinating, Andra, the professor said, flipping through his detailed notes. You've got insights here that most consultants would miss. How did you gather all this information? Andra smiled. I deliver their packages. To them, I'm just the delivery guy. They don't see me, but I see everything. The next day, Andra arrived at Pinnacle with a new purpose. He began jotting down specific examples of waste and mismanagement. He noted which teams seemed motivated and which didn't. He documented the stark contrast between the lavish executive floor with its expensive artwork and the cramped customer service department with broken chairs and outdated equipment. In the IT department, he overheard the director complaining about security vulnerabilities that the executive team refused to address. They don't want to spend the money until there's a breach, the director grumbled to a colleague. By then, it'll be too late. During his lunch break, Andra sat in his van, organizing his observations into categories: financial mismanagement, poor employee treatment, missed market opportunities, and potential legal risks. The picture that emerged wasn't pretty. Pinnacle Technologies was a company headed for trouble, led by people too arrogant to see the warning signs. What Andra didn't know was that Pinnacle's largest investor was already concerned. Wellington Capital had been watching the company's declining performance and growing complaints from former employees on job review sites. They were quietly looking for someone who could give them an unvarnished view of what was really happening inside the company. Every morning at exactly 10:30, the delivery van pulled up to the glossy glass building of Pinnacle Technologies. The driver, a tall man in his early 40s with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, grabbed his electronic scanner and the first batch of packages for the day. His name tag read Andra, though nobody at Pinnacle ever bothered to look at it. For 3 years, Andra had been delivering packages to this building. 3 years of the same routine, the same faces, and the same subtle disrespect that hung in the air like a bad smell. Today was no different as he pushed his car through the fancy lobby, nodding at the security guard, who at least had the decency to nod back. "Hold the elevator," Andra called, seeing the doors begin to close. The man inside, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than Andra made in a month, looked directly at him and did nothing as the doors shut. Andra sighed and waited for the next one. When he finally reached the executive floor, he was greeted by the usual scene. The receptionist was busy painting her nails and talking on her phone. She held up one finger, signaling him to wait, even though all he needed was a signature. "I'll be with you in a minute, delivery guy," she said, not bothering to end her personal call. Andra stood patiently, watching the office buzz around him. People rushed past with coffee cups and folders, too busy to notice the man who brought their important packages day after day. Through the glass walls of the conference room, he could see several executives in a meeting, laughing and slapping each other on the back. Finally, the receptionist said, hanging up her call after a full 5 minutes. "What do you need me to sign?" "Just this delivery confirmation," Andra said politely, handing her the scanner. As she scribbled her signature, a group of young executives walked by. One of them, a guy with slicked back hair, nudged his friend and said loudly enough for Andrew to hear, "Look at delivery boy. Still driving around packages while the rest of us are closing million-dollar deals." His friends laughed, not bothering to lower their voices or hide their smirks. "Maybe he should have stayed in school," another one added with a snicker. Little did they know that Andrew spent his evenings in graduate classes, working toward his MBA with a focus on corporate restructuring. After his shift ended at 6 p.m., he would rush to the university, often still in his delivery uniform, to attend his night classes. While these executives were out drinking at happy hour, Andrew was studying business strategies and leadership principles. What they also didn't know was how much Andrew saw during his daily deliveries. How he noticed when employees looked stressed or when tensions ran high. How he overheard conversations about dropping sales figures and lost clients. How he saw the office assistant crying in the break room after being yelled at by her boss for a minor mistake. Back in his van, Andrew took a moment to jot down some notes in the small notebook he kept in his pocket. Observations about the company culture, the leadership style, the treatment of lower-level employees. His professor had encouraged the class to find real-world examples for their final project, and Pinnacle Technologies was providing plenty of material. One day, Andrew whispered to himself as he started the engine, "One day they'll see me differently." He checked his delivery schedule, 7 more stops to make before lunch. Then another full afternoon of deliveries before evening classes. It was a grueling schedule that left little time for anything else, but Andrew had a plan. A plan that kept him going through the long days and the disrespect. A plan that his wife supported wholeheartedly, even when it meant he missed family dinners and bedtime stories with their 2 children. As he pulled away from Pinnacle Technologies, Andrew didn't know that in just a few months, everything would change. The people who barely saw him now would soon be unable to look away. The executives who mocked him would soon be scrambling to explain themselves, and the company that treated him like he was nothing would soon discover exactly who had been walking through their doors every day at 10:30 a.m.